Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Trust you guys are doing well. Waking up to a beautiful day here in New England. Sun is going to be shining. Weather's warm. Trust you guys are doing well. Waking up feeling refreshed and ready to begin this new day. Today is Tuesday, May the 9th, and we're well into this springtime, aren't we? Um, Yesterday was a really good day. Had an opportunity to talk to a number of people. I think I mentioned yesterday that we had our town hall meeting at Bethany on Sunday afternoon. People came with all kinds of really great ideas about reaching out. Some spoke about we used to have at Bethany an event called Ride by the Sea. It was a duathlon race that we sponsored. People could ride down near the seacoast, and it was just really well attended. And so we're thinking about maybe revising something like that again. We're in a great geographical location for something like that. But just great ideas, just reaching out, finding ways to just communicate this gospel in a different culture. So we were happy to do that and looking forward to what's going to unfold as a result. We are in the midst of a study now in Matthew chapter 22 and looking at verses 15 through 40. This is a text that has begun to demonstrate just the rising hostility against Jesus. Um, we're going to have various groups that are going to come and really put him to the test. We have seen Jesus demonstrating already in his words and since his entry into Jerusalem, right on Palm Sunday, that um, there is this constant, refrain that those who thought they were in really, need to reconsider again what's going on. Jesus gives them the three parables that really talked about those who had privilege were actually not um, not in good stead, with what Jesus was accomplishing, and that they needed to rethink through everything that they were doing. Um, the stories that follow now have everything to do with them putting Jesus to the test, trying to trap him in his words and discredit him before the people. So I'd like to bring you to this passage this morning. And yesterday we looked at a passage where the Pharisees had joined forces with the Herodians. The Herodians were a Jewish group who had become very sympathizers with the Herod dynasty, and as a result, they were also trying to seek favor with Rome, and so they would have been in favor of these taxes and been used as a proponent because they thought, well, hey, we getting good with Rome, then it's good for us, right? So we're gonna be on their team. Pharisees saw this as an affront against the very commandments of God, right? This kind of worship of Caesar is something that turned them off completely, and as a result, they didn't see, and they only participated because they were forced to, in terms of the taxation. So when they come to Jesus, they put him in a position where it's like a no-win situation. Either he's going to side with them or he's going to side with the Herodians. And in either way, it would have been a great position to put him in a bad light, not only with the Romans, but also with the people themselves. Instead, Jesus gives them a reply: um, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give unto God what belongs to God. And we realize that in this text, in a way that will be later, it will be developed in a much stronger way. What we're given is some insight into what it means to live in this duality, right, where we are citizens in this world, but we're also citizens of this kingdom of heaven. We're being asked to live by kingdom principles in this world, and so it doesn't deter one from the other. We read a passage from Romans 13 that speak about how all institutions they're governed by God. Now they may not, not every regime, right, is is really protective of its people, is looking out for the rights of those who are in any way disenfranchised. But God is still sovereign over heaven and earth, and so we're being asked to step into that and demonstrate a fidelity to God that isn't compromised by the fact that we're also being asked to be citizens, good citizens in the countries in which we live. You might remember in Jeremiah 29, there's that beautiful text where it says, "I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you," right? To give you a hope and a future. Well, that comes in a context, right, where God is telling his people that because of their disobedience, they are going to be overcome by Babylon. And the Babylonians are going to take them and they are going to be exiled into another country. You remember what God told the people there? He says, when you're there, he says, I want you to pray for that country. I want you to work for it because, this is, you're going to be there for a little while. And so that's another great illustration of how we're living in this duality. God says, settle down, marry, build houses, plant vineyards. Like, yeah, I want you. You pray for the peace of the city, and it'll be peaceful for you. And so here's a bad situation, but they are not only citizens of heaven, they are citizens in that instance of Babylon, and they needed to see that city would prosper. So that duality was an interesting one brought in by Jesus's response. Today, I want us to look at this another passage, and this is a passage now that we're going to find in Matthew 22, and this time it's going to be the Sadducees that are going to come up, and they are going to be putting Jesus to this test. So why don't we pick it up in verse 23? It says, that same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. Teacher, they said, Moses told us that if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and have children for him. Now, there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married and died, and since he had no children, he left his wife to his brother. The same thing happened to the second and third brother, right on down to the 7th. Finally, the woman died. Now, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be of the 7, since all of them were married to her? Jesus replied, you're in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. And the resurrection people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. But about the resurrection of the dead, you have not read what God said to you. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowds heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. So here we have Jesus now being confronted by these Sadducees. It's interesting that in this text, we are introduced to another one of the powerful groups that were providing leadership to Israel during this time. The Sadducees, they formed a significant part of the Sanhedrin, which was the Jewish ruling council. So the Sanhedrin was made up of Pharisees, Sadducees, elders, and they sat over the nation of Israel with the permission of Rome. They could not act completely autonomously, as seen in the fact that they want Jesus to be crucified. They could not have Jesus put to death, but they coerced Rome to do their bidding for them. And so that's how that all takes place. But it's interesting, right? Here is a group that is supposed to be a part of this nation of Israel, and it says in our text here that they say that there is no resurrection. Now, this idea of a resurrection, maybe one of the in my study, I came across this one text, and I'll put it down here for you. It was a text that's found in the book of Daniel, and in chapter 12, and in verse 2. So if you, I'll put it up on the screen so you can have it. This is an interesting text to consider when it comes to this whole idea of resurrection. So why don't I read this to you? In at this time, it says this. It says, this is the text in Daniel. It says, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. See, this is a prophecy, and it is depicting what is going to come in these last days. And this is being given to Daniel, who is writing during this exile of Israel in Babylon, right? So this text, though, it's one of the most direct Old Testament texts that we have that explicitly speak of a resurrection. But the Sadducees, they don't believe in this resurrection. And if you really notice what's happening here, the Sadducees, they also are using the resurrection as a foil, right? They are also entering into this plot to really trap Jesus. And so they don't believe in a resurrection, and yet they want to use this to what? They come up with this worst case scenario that is just designed to put Jesus in a bad light and to discredit him before the people. So how hypocritical is that? Like, we just finished reading about the Pharisees and the Herodians, people on opposite sides of this issue of taxation, but they're using that for no other reason than just to set Jesus up. And here you have Sadducees who are using this whole doctrine of resurrection for no other reason to set Jesus up. And these are the spiritual leaders. You would think that they would be above this, right? They're about truth. They're about, loving God with all their heart, mind, soul, strength, and loving their neighbors as themselves. They're supposed to be pointing people to this direction. And instead, they're mired in the deception that we often find in the world around us. Is it any wonder then that Jesus just takes them on? Now, when it says here, it says, look at verse, let's go back and go back to Matthew chapter 22. And in Matthew 22, just take a look here with me at verse 24. Because the Sadducees here, they are going to pose this question to Jesus. And I think it's important that we get a little bit more of an understanding of what they're saying. They say, "Teacher, Moses told us that if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and have children for him." See, according to this marriage in which your brother is responsible for marrying a deceased brother's widow who has had no offspring in order to perpetuate the family line, because everything was about land, right? It was about um, your ability to provide for your families came through your line. If your line ended, that was the end, right? I mean, we get that. We You want an heir to carry on this name. So when you look at this passage, then the Sadducees are referring back to this law, and where do they get that from? Well, there are you might remember very uh, it's a weird kind of a story, but it was a story of Judah, and and uh, and he lied with his brother's wife to fulfill his duty to her as a brother-in-law to produce offspring for her brother. That was way back in Genesis 38, verse 8. And in the book of Deuteronomy, there's this passage in Deuteronomy 25, verse 5. And I'll read it to you. It says, if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. And then it goes on to talk about how this was an honorable thing to do. In verse 7 of Deuteronomy 25, it goes on and says, however, if a man does not want to marry his brother's wife, she shall go to the elders at the town gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to carry on his brother's name in Israel. He will not fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to me. And then the elders of his town shall summon him and talk to him. And if he persists in saying, I do not want to marry her, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of his sandals, spit in his face, and say, this is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line. The man's line shall be known in Israel as the family of the unsandaled. Now, different culture, I get it. But you can see how serious and this was. So here, just so you get this right, they are using a law that was prevalent in Israel, and they're using this law in a way to trap Jesus, and they hook it up now with this doctrine of resurrection, of which they do not believe. And so consequently, all of this just speaks of such insincerity on their part that it's interesting to me that Jesus would even continue to have these conversations with them. And so there is this illustration now of all of these husbands. I was kidding around, and I said, it's no wonder this woman died. She had 7 husbands. That would be enough to put anybody in the grave. But here, they only use this absurd example. They could have made it with just one, right? They could have said, hey, she married a brother-in-law, and like when she dies, whose husband is she? But no, they want to make this seem really absurd. And so they present Jesus with this case. And what's interesting when you think about this is how Jesus is going to answer. But before we go there, there's one more text that I want you to take a look at with me, because it's another one of these texts that just gives you a little bit more insight into the Pharisees. And that's found in Acts chapter 23 and verse 8. So if you turn to Acts 23, I'd like to give you a little bit more insight and into what's going on. why don't we pick it up in the beginning of this chapter, because it sets the context here, right? This is the Apostle Paul, and he's being brought up on charges, right, on the before the Sanhedrin, because he has been out testifying about Jesus and his resurrection, and the fact that Jesus is this Messiah. Isn't it interesting? They thought they were going to silence Jesus's voice, and instead, with the disciples going out and being the very light and salt of the earth that God called them to be, and people responding. Look at what happened on the day of Pentecost. On the day of Pentecost, when the Spirit of God was poured out, it says thousands of people came to put their faith in Jesus that on that day alone. So it was like somebody took a feather pillow, ripped it open, threw it up in the air, and now these feathers are going everywhere. They thought they had a problem with Jesus. Now there is this momentum that is beginning to build, and they don't know what to do about it. And here, one of their own, Paul, a Pharisee, who now has come to know the Lord, is just presenting them with such great problems. So here in Acts chapter 23, Paul, he looks straight at the Sanhedrin. Remember, this is that Jewish ruling council comprised of Sadducees and Pharisees, right? So Paul looks straight at the Sanhedrin and says, "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day." At this, the high priest, Ananias, who, by the way, is a Sadducee, right, ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck." Why? Because he wasn't he wasn't he wasn't judged of anything by even their own court. So he was administering his own justice without any witnesses or anything else. So he was breaking the law. Verse 4, those who were standing near Paul said, "You dare to insult God's high priest?" And Paul replied, "Brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest, for it is written, 'Do not speak evil about the ruler of your people.'" Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, "My brothers, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. I stand on trial because of my hope in the resurrection of the dead." When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection and that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. There was a great uproar, and some of the teachers of the law who were Pharisees stood up and argued vigorously. "We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel had spoken to him?" The dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them. He ordered the troops to go down, take him away from them by force, and bring him into the barracks. So here, there is this really tense situation that Paul is experiencing because he has been testifying about Jesus and his resurrection from the dead. But he uses this dispute in a way to bring the attention back off of him. And consequently, now the Sadducees and the Pharisees are fighting over this doctrine of resurrection. So again, just another text to see that when we were reading here in this passage, it was a passage that is just reinforcing the Sadducees are so hypocritical because they want to talk about something that they don't even believe in, only for the sole purpose of putting Jesus in a bad light. So all you're getting a little background on these people and realizing why this is heightened so in this last week before Jesus is going to be crucified, right? This is taking place in this final week. So tempers are flaring, people are taking sides. You could see why the Pharisees and the Herodians, they're not happy with Jesus. And now we're going to discover why the Sadducees are not. Because look how Jesus replies in verse 29. He says, "You are in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God." So Jesus is going to call them out. But notice he does it on two levels. He says, first, you don't know the scriptures, and you also do not know the power of God. So in the verses that remain in this confrontation, those are the two lines of thought that Jesus is now going to bring before the Sadducees. He's going to take them on in terms of their understanding of Scripture, but he's also going to take them on in terms of their understanding of who God is. They are limiting God's power. They are suggesting by their interpretations that God, is limited and he can't do certain things. It's like putting God in a box. The Sadducees are not unlike many in our day who say, they don't believe in the authority of Scripture, that there are no such things as absolutes. There's no such thing as absolute truth. There's no such thing as supernatural. It's just whatever you see is what you get. And it's always interesting to me, and maybe you guys, some of you, I'm sure, have heard this before, but when someone says there are no absolutes, don't you see that they just made one? To say there are no absolutes is to have made an absolute. And so they just really, what they're saying is that they don't believe in God's absolute. And so the Sadducees here they are supposed to be representing the nation of Israel and being, encouraging people to come to an understanding of this God as he has revealed himself in Scripture. And they already have limited God and put him in a box and just said, no, God doesn't do these things. So when Jesus says, you don't know the power of God, it's because he's saying to them, you really don't know God. You've only taken a piece of what you think God is all about, but he is so much more than that. And we're going to see how he does that, and we'll take a look at that tomorrow. But today it's enough, right, to just recognize how sometimes this level of hypocrisy when it comes to Jesus and his ministry is astounding, and you can see why these people would begin to just find such a displeasure with Jesus and such a threat to their own authority that just within a few days they're going to be judging him and convicting him to be crucified by the Romans. Well, I hope today was a little bit informing for you as we continue to work through these passages. And every day gives us this opportunity to seize the day. And so today's Tuesday, May 9th. I trust you go aware that we serve a God who is good all the time. And it's worth spending time like today in this word. So God bless you. Look forward to tomorrow. We'll pay close attention to Jesus's responses now to the Sadducees. So God bless. And Lord willing, we'll spend some more time tomorrow.